American heroes sage wisdom. A deeper look from someone who finished your demo.
Bowyage was the game I promised to get to next. It's a short, simple demo, and I'm a man of my word, so let's get right into it. There's no shortage of Metroidvanias in this day and age, but Bowyage is something a bit different. Based in a low-fantasy medieval Europe, this game looks and plays a lot more like the very first Castlevania game. A linear combat platforming excursion through dark enemy-infested corridors. Just like Super Freaks, this is a deceptively humble game with a lot of deliberation in its design. Our protagonist, the sort of eponymous Yew Bowman, moves at a realistic speed and jumps at a realistic arc, though is fortunately a bit more maneuverable mid-air than a Belmont, and is equipped with two weapons, a sword and a longbow. Both kill enemies in one hit, well, a bit more on that later, with the sword being fast and snappy with a limited reach, while the bow packs a punch at any range but has a bit of a slow pullback. A nice modern touch is that either of these actions can be jump cancelled, and the sword can also be swung mid-air. Doing so gives you far better maneuverability actually, so there's basically no reason not to jump when attacking. Sounds simple? It is. Yew doesn't have any sort of wild tricks, but that's because he's not really the one carrying here. The game's challenge and fun factor falls squarely on the sturdy shoulders of the three main enemy types. Crossbowmen are stationary foes who fire their crossbows at you, and you. The bolts can be jumped over easily enough, but what adds to this enemy greatly is that he can also dodge you, and you. Just before and until a second or so after firing, crossbowmen will go prone, and since your own arrow has a slight firing delay and can only travel at shoulder height, you'll often miss if you fire too early or late. You can also find yourself playing chicken with them at times. Will you risk finishing the drawback animation if a bolt is already coming your way, or will you jump cancel to avoid damage but sacrifice your shot? That depends on the situation, but note that taking damage will cancel your action anyway, so it's usually better to prioritize dodging. Shield guys? We'll call them shield guys. It feels wrong calling them that, considering they aren't good enough with shields to block my reckless jump and charge strike, but they will deflect any arrows you shoot at them. They aren't very challenging on their own, but their anti-arrow properties and the long reach of their own weapons basically turn them into mobile cover that you have to advance on to deal with. When paired up with a crossbowman, the shield guy adds a lot of tension. Throw a trap or two on the floor and the odds are suddenly against you, making it through without tanking a hit. We'll talk about that when we get to difficulty and balance. Final enemy, Sword Guy. These probably all have cool, fancy, historical, medieval titles, but Sword Guy is a melee fighter who likes to use hit-and-run tactics, hanging back and charging before returning to... Okay, you know what, not really sure what this guy's deal is. He's functionally just a crossbowman who you can kill by attacking the arrow, and who can't dodge your own shots. They can take you off guard, but these guys are basically the fodder archetype as far as I can tell. There are also three types of obstacles that help spice encounters up a bit. Barricades can be broken with your sword, spikes cannot, and pits, well, they're pits. Ever played a video game? You know how those work. A few more types of obstacles, like a pendulum or a historical medieval thwomp, would have been appreciated, but it is what it is, and what it is the very first level. But on that note, even for a first level, the Bowyage demo is surprisingly easy, especially given its inspiration. Checkpoints are plentiful, and you get more than enough hit points even on the highest difficulty to tank things, but the biggest cheese comes down to enemy attack intervals. Remember all those fancy behaviors I just went over? Well, they're all on timers, and instead of starting a bit ahead when they first come on screen, those timers activate at full cooldown time. That means if you just fire an arrow as soon as an enemy scrolls on screen, it will always kill them before they get a chance to do anything. Shield guys are the obvious exception, and they can and will give anyone fortunate enough to spawn behind them one free action, but everyone else is pierced up the rearmost of orifices once you figure this little cheat out. Most notable thing any of the difficulty options does is remove jump canceling, an odd choice but definitely does add to the challenge. My suggestion is base the starting timer of enemy actions on difficulty as well, that it actually be a relatively easy addition, and even aside from making enemies less cheesable, giving the player less reaction time would make the game more challenging in general. There's only one boss in the demo, the Varangian? Yeah, the other guys definitely have fancy names I just forgot. He's a decent challenge, but very simple and also cheesable. He attacks with a Super Mario triple jump, swinging at the apex of his leaps, if only the third being high enough for you to get under. Normally he'll slash at you and approach, so you need to use this opportunity to get behind him, get in, have him pierce up the rearmost bosses. Once you figure this little slither gift, he if roll its way with street, just line over it. And there's you're from an opposite fun and then from a big low and and then it's by the side leash. And you know, it's to get from the lakes, you walk, and you're small see in with sword. Unless you hit him near the top of his third jump. To be fair, this isn't so much an exploit as intentional speedrunning tech, but it's extremely easy to do, so I'm not quite sure what to think of it. Presentation-wise, this game actually has some really good strong points. The pixel art itself isn't mind-blowing, this ain't quite Xanadu, but there's a nice realistic style to everything, and the sprites themselves are very large and detailed. There's also a surprising amount of gruesome pixelated blood going on here. Just look at the boss's death scene. Yeesh! The story here is simple as Super Freak's story, which I completely forgot to cover, though much more grounded. I mean, this is basically it right here. That's the synopsis. You start by breaking out of jail while your soldiers attack the castle off-screen, retrieve your signature weapon, and execute the executioner before he can execute on executing you. Or you. The most unique part is that Yew's not exactly a typical video game hero. He isn't out to topple an evil king or slay an evil dragon for being evil. His stakes in this conflict are very personal, and his goal is basically just to survive a three-way war within his family. Try saying that 10 times fast. Even if that means going on a conquest of his own. He isn't necessarily the good guy, he's simply the underdog, though admittedly how he stacks up against his other brothers as a person is yet to be seen. The most impressive thing in Bowyage, though, is probably the music. Just listen to these god-tier chiptunes. This is the instruction manual theme, for crying out loud. That's just mad. That's just mad. Bowyage is a bit harder to rate than Super Freaks. If nothing else, there's way less content to dig into here in the first place. But for what's present and how much fun I had in my short time, I'll rate it 1 point lower at 7.5 out of 10. To explain my rating system a bit more, these are, of course, based around the standard of amateur, small team, or solo projects. With a 1 being, did you make this in Game Maker or WarioWare DIY, 5 being, unimpressive but inoffensive, and 10 being, I genuinely don't know how you could make this better without just making it a different game. Anyway, that's all for now. Talk at you later.
So awesome. So cool. The most incredible superhero.